All right, how's everyone doing? Thank you so much for joining us today. We are here for a very important discussion titled Dreaming Ourselves Food, Collective Manifesting a Food System Absent of Safe Foods. At this moment, I want to first acknowledge the Why Hunger staff that helped to put this all together. Kristen, if you can just wave, she's our lovely moderator. And she will, again, she's part of our programming team. Joel, if you can wave to folks, he will be serving as our interpreter today. We have Suzanne, who will be moderating the chat section and also part of our programming team. Betty, unfortunately, will not be with us today, but she's with us in spirit, and she did a great job putting everything together. And then Salo, who will also be helping to moderate the comment section. So at this point, we have a very tight schedule, so I really want to jump right into today's discussion. And I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, who will be moderating for the majority of today's event.
Thank you, Regina. Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Wishing you all wellness. Hope everybody and their family are well right now. Folks, feel free to introduce yourselves in the chat where you're calling in from. My name is Kristen. I am with the Global Movements Program at Why Hunger. I'm Nipmuc. We are a native tribe from Massachusetts and parts of northern Connecticut and northern Rhode Island. I'm calling in from Massachusetts territory and really blessed to be here with this amazing panelist of speakers that we have. I just wanted to open up the space to ground ourselves in this political moment that we are in. We know we are in this crisis of a pandemic, and as many folks are saying, this crisis of racism as well, which has prompted us to make sure that we are understanding the way violence permeates in all of its forms. That's our focus today. With the recent killings of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Marielle Franco, only naming a few, the international news coverage has shown a groundswell of global protests led by grassroots movements to fight against state violence, and it's been taking up in countries all over the world. I'm going to ground us with a reading from an excerpt of that was drafted by and created by Beatrice Beckford. Beatrice is the former director of Why Hunger's Grassroots Action Network, and she currently works as the national director of Moms Rising. She mentions in response to Ferguson several years ago, asking what Ferguson means for food justice has forced me to confront my personal hesitation to juxtapose the connection between the death of Black people at the hands of the police and state and the death of Black people at the hands of the corporate food system intentionally reinforced by the state. The intricacy of America's systems of oppression have always used land and food as weapons of choice. I say this not to take away any urgency from the extreme state violence Black communities face at the hands of the state via a militarized police, but to make some important connections between the extreme and the everyday manifestations of violence against Black people. And so we're really blessed today to have this dynamic panel of movement leaders who are working to address violence in the food system, are manifesting a dream of a way out. And I'm gonna introduce these folks in a minute, but also recognize that here where Why Hunger is based in Turtle Island, there are thousands of years absent of violence in the food system. And so we know this collective of people have a vision and have a way out. We'll get to hear the work that they're doing. Our panelists today are Randolph Carr of the National Black Food and Justice Alliance, Nicole Yanes of NDN Collective, Miriam Nobre of World March of Women, and Francis Perez-Rodriguez of La Finca del Sur. We have a packed hour, so we're going to move right along, and panelists only have a few minutes to speak to each of these questions. We're going to start with this overarching question, wanting to hear from the panelists more about themselves, the perspectives of their work in organizing and what is state violence in the food system. So I'm going to start with my Indigenous sister, Nicole Yanes. If you could please introduce yourself. And again, providing some perspective on state violence within First Nations and Indigenous communities.
Most definitely, Kristen. Eko now. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be here.
I'm going to pass it along to our Indigenous sister, Nicole. Are you ready?
I'm ready. Thank you. Well said, brother. Well, based on time, you know, it's a very big subject, but systemic racism and state violence is very tied to our food system. And within Indigenous communities, it has been ongoing for 500 years, with the beginning with the doctrine of Christian domination, known as the doctrine of discovery, that validated and created and is the cornerstone of property law and private property rights in every single country. And so with that, it validated in the colonial court system the stealing of resources and Indigenous territories and the genocide of Indigenous peoples. And it still continues to happen. We have seen every day it happens, but we have seen when it's more televised, like with the Dakota Access Pipeline. Indigenous people were protecting the Minnesota River, the life-giving river that Indigenous people depend for ceremonies and as a sacred site, but also for their food sources, especially hunter and gatherer societies. And we were met with government agencies and military and with heavy armed forces when you had peaceful treaty land and water defenders. We have seen it in Brazil with the Amazon tribes, when corporations and government wants to give access to corporations to deforest the lands for monocropping and for cattle grazing. And they're faced with state violence. We have seen it in Sonora with the Rio Yaqui, with the Rio Sonora. And so a lot of times it's not that we don't have the attention of the media. And we recently saw with Mount Rushmore up in South Dakota last month with the action that NDN Collective led. And so it's ongoing, and it many times it happens when Indigenous people are standing for our territories and protecting the territories that have been stolen from us, and so states continue to violate the collective rights of Indigenous people. States continue to violate the treaties, which the U.S. Constitution says are the supreme law of the land, and we see that countries, which I know are called states in the international setting, put corporations' interests first and don't care about violating the rights of Indigenous people. So this conversation, I mean, I had created such a big presentation, but I know we have very limited time. This conversation is much needed. It started with the genocide of Indigenous peoples, the slavery of African Americans. It happens with the replacing of Indigenous food systems with monocropping and agriculture. It's a biological warfare. When we, for example, one example, and just so you see even the state violence that happens right now and the systemic racism in our food systems, there's toxins that are illegal for consumption in the U.S. because they're proven to cause cancer and birth defects, but are produced in the U.S. in Louisiana, shipped to Mexico to Indigenous communities and sprayed. And we have collected, the International Treaty Council has collected so many testimonies of the birth defects and midwife testimonies. And they're sprayed in Indigenous communities and by brown farmers. And what does that mean? That our lives are less, that it doesn't matter if you spray these chemicals in Mexico and South America, but they can't be sprayed here in the United States. So I'll stop there, I guess, with this first question, but it's ongoing, and it's time for reparations, and it's time for justice, that we create a just and equitable world for everybody.
Thank you, Nicole. It's, let it not be lost on us that we're having this conversation on biological warfare during a global pandemic. And the lack of media attention, you're right, is real. And 1 hour to come together as peoples from Turtle Island, and next I'll introduce Miriam, who's calling in from Brazil. We need to keep having these conversations and keep lifting up this crisis. Here's where we're shifting, because we know, and this is something I love about working with Why Hunger, is that we know the folks who are most marginalized, most impacted by state violence, by the food system, by displacement, are the ones with the solutions. They're the ones that have gone through the struggle. And so we're going to turn it over to you all to hear, how your work is helping to create a food system free of state violence, and how we can work collectively to manifest that system free of state violence. As I said, Turtle Island had thousands of years without violence in the food system. What is the vision? I'm going to turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Kristen. What's my time on this? 2 minutes or 3 minutes? 4? I know we're kind of pumping.
I would say 3.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. So it really comes down to strengthening our food sovereignty, right? And it looks different in every single community. In order to have food security, we need to address food sovereignty. And so through my work throughout the last 10 years, it has taken hold with an education movement, all based on ecological restoration and even impacting policies that affect us at the ground, tribal, local level, and continue to infringe on our rights. But within, I guess I didn't introduce myself. As program officer of NDN Collective, NDN Collective's mission is to build a collective power of Indigenous peoples so that we have a just and equitable world for everybody and for the planet, right? And so with this, we're going to get to our mission through defend, develop, and decolonize. Those are the bases. And and so one example is with COVID. Indigenous peoples, some communities were hit at a disproportional level, and the resources weren't available to a lot of brown communities, a lot of immigrant communities, and Indigenous communities. And so we launched a $10 million project, emergency response project, rapid response project to COVID. Phase 1 was to address immediate needs, right? Medical supplies, food, drinking water to Indigenous communities throughout the US, Canada, and Mexico. And now this phase 2, which is going to be launching very soon, is based on it's going to be based on building the food system that will prevent us from getting to the place where we're at, right? It's going to be based on transition and resilience, supporting Indigenous communities and building their food sovereignty, their food systems that are more autonomous and less dependent on the globalized economy and government. And so the other is really, because I also consult with the International Treaty Council and the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance for the last 6 years and 3 years, And so a lot of the work that we've been doing there is through the rematriation of seeds and creating, like with NAFSA, the Native American Food Sovereignty Alliance, the rematriation of seeds and creating regional seed hubs in different regions and in Indigenous communities, and supporting farmers with the growing of seed. And so there's a lot of work that we're doing. And I guess I want to mention that being here less than half a mile from the border, the colonial border between the US and Mexico, and growing up here, I mean, you grow up in a state of violence, right? You grow up in a very militarized place, and this colonial border has infringed on our rights as Indigenous peoples to trade. It has cut those ties of trade that has happened for thousands of years before these borders were here and before these colonial countries were here. And so what we're doing also is restoring those trade routes from sovereign nation to sovereign nation, from Belize and Mexico and in different nations in the US, in Canada, and making those direct agreements so that we can restore those trade routes and maybe even open up our own ports in Indigenous lands so that we restore those trade routes and not have to go through this system, right? That really is not built for Indigenous people. It's built for corporations. Indigenous producers can't compete with this market, with this loss of importation and exportation. And so we're building our own, we're restoring our trade routes, we're building our own food sovereignty and supporting many Indigenous communities from the ground up, from the community level and movement to the international, and impacting policies at the international level that we know are going to affect us, and continue to demand for the respect of our rights so that we can continue with our ways of life.
We have this question of what are you doing of creating that vision, and then also, can you speak to the need for grassroots internationalism as a way of resistance and liberation? Like, what's the collective global vision and how do we get there? That would be the last question. But before that, we're going to talk a little bit about the local and the strategies that you're putting into place for manifesting this dream. Nicole, are you okay to close it out?
Definitely. Thank you, Kristen and Miriam. And I mean, a lot of we've worked together before on very different mechanisms of why hunger and the World Women March on Women. So I'll close with definitely our movements, they need to work together, right? We need to show up for each other, and that's the only way that we're going to be able to create a just and equitable world for all people that respects human rights and all of our collective rights. And so that's the way that we're going to be able to make the systemic changes of racism and dismantle white supremacy. And we have seen that the impact that it has when we come together and work together from the local, community, national, international levels. In terms of collective internationalism, we have seen it with the DAPL, the divest, in Palestine, right? That solidarity of divesting from corporations that are affecting our communities. And so there's no other way for us to do it if we're going to really dismantle white supremacy, and if we're really going to make a systematic change and get rid of racism. We have to come together, and it's not only our movement, but it's ranchers, is private land owners, and so we have seen that our problems are very similar, and just one example of how important it is to be part of this global movement is we, through working with the International Planning Committee on Food Sovereignty, and the CSM, the Civil Society and Indigenous Peoples Mechanism of the Committee on Food Security, right? And so when these policies are passed, for example, in the US or in Canada or in Mexico, of this corporation that's about to pass this policy to introduce, for example, not genetic modified organisms, but synthetic modified organisms. And there's 8 different types of modified organisms out there that are coming for our communities and our people, right? We can let each other know. We can say, hey, this just passed in Mexico. We let our brothers and sisters know in South America and other parts of the world, and they can quash it before that law gets passed. And that's the power of being connected. That's the power of connecting and informing each other. And I just want to close with we're going to get our land back. And it's now more doable than ever because of the Black Lives Matter movement. The power that it has created has impacted every marginalized people and community. And it has created so much change that we have been fighting for land back for so long, but it's going to happen. And it's going to happen because of the power and energy that the Black Lives Matter movement has created, and the work that our ancestors and the previous generations and our elders have done, and all the sacrifices that they have made so that we're here. So land back, justice for everybody. Thank you for having me here. It's been an honor to be with all of you today.
Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for lifting up our elders, our ancestors, even our youth that are showing tremendous hope for our way out. I want to extend much gratitude to Regina, who helped us coordinate this. Regina, are you still there? And do you maybe want to just say a closing word and thank you for everybody for being here and part of this container?
Can folks hear me? Okay, I think I see shaking heads. Okay. All right, awesome. Well, I mean, I don't know. I hope I speak for everyone by saying that I'm blown away by this conversation and the brilliance and the intelligence of everyone who participated. I don't want the conversation to end. And hopefully this is just the beginning of an ongoing conversation, a much needed conversation, especially during this time of election year. So I just want to say thank you for attending Why Hunger's virtual roundtable discussion. At Why Hunger, we believe hunger is solvable, and those solutions to hunger lie with the grassroots movements and organizations doing the work to ensure nutritious food is a human right for all. So to that end, what better way to highlight the voices of movement leaders, all the panelists that were on today's event on the front lines doing the work is so very important. So again, I just want to uplift all of the panelists today. Really quickly, Randolph, Miriam, Nicole, Francis, you rock, you're amazing. Thank you for bringing all your brilliance and intelligence. I want to quickly also give a special thank you to Why Hunger's programming team, who worked tirelessly to put this amazing event together. Kristen, Joelle, Salo, Lori, Suzanne, Betty, Patricia, thank you all. And I think that's it, y'all. Hopefully you'll come back when we do something again. All right. I think we're going to end it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll be in touch. Thank you all, but take care.